Margaret Brennan. And Margaret, so much changes now in a time when the Prime Minister has a lot to deal with at home as well.
She does indeed. And now the King will be potentially someone to turn to for counsel, but nothing like what Queen Elizabeth had with 70 years on the throne. If you think about those 70 years, that's really the shaping of the world order that we know right now. And she witnessed it. So that counsel won't be there for Prime Minister Truss in that same way. That soft power perhaps not as much of a tool potentially for her at a time she needs it. I mean, take a look at what's happening in the United Kingdom right now. It is really on the verge of major economic crisis with recession forecast, inflation at a 40-year high, worst inflation in Europe, an identity crisis underway that you gestured to earlier. I mean, she was the Queen of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, there's still a nasty divorce with Europe going on, in particular around this issue of Northern Ireland. There's an independence movement in Scotland. So exactly what the kingdom will look like, the shape it will take, may be changing for the new monarch as he steps into that role. And it really is I want to come back to something Tina Brown pointed out earlier in terms of the soft power. That 2011 visit that the Queen made to Ireland, the very first monarch since Irish independence. The Taoiseach, the leader of Ireland today, releasing a statement giving her credit for helping to establish ties between the two countries and helping to overcome that really painful colonial past. So that's not something to simply be dismissed. That is a powerful symbol. As close as they could have come to apology, she called it sad and regrettable reality. So there is some legacy there, though we will see what happens with the King now stepping into this role. President Biden has said in recent months, you know, how he enjoyed his conversations with the Queen, which you saw in June. We're expecting the White House to, of course, say something now. We'll be standing by for that.
Yes, and expecting, of course, reaction that is already pouring in from around the world.
Around the world, from across the realms and the Commonwealth. And that is so interesting, given Great Britain's sometimes very painful relationship, to have the leaders of countries like Ireland and India coming out and expressing remorse. It speaks to who she was and the symbol of what she had become, rather than the country and some of the more thorny political issues that the Queen had really helped some of these leaders navigate. Think about the Trump administration and what it meant to President Trump. Some of his advisors have talked about how that really took some of the rough edges off that trip, that he got to sit with the Queen at that time when U.S.-UK relations were somewhat frayed. So she has played a real role in helping to navigate.
Margaret Brennan, thank you. I know you'll stand by with us. I want to return now to Holly Williams, who is outside Buckingham Palace, and the sun setting there and the crowds gathering. And I understand there's been a beautiful double rainbow.
There was a little earlier, Nora. We began to see people actually gather outside the golden gates of Buckingham Palace here earlier this afternoon, when we just had the news that the Queen was obviously in quite poor health and that her family had rushed to be with her in Scotland. Hundreds of people began gathering. That's unusual at this time of year, at this time of the day. People are now pouring into the streets of this part of central London. I would say there are now thousands of people gathered here. The Union Jack, which flies atop of Buckingham Palace, was lowered immediately on that official news that the Queen had passed away. Now, you know, I think all of us probably can cast our minds, or many of us, if we're the right age, can cast our minds back to 1997 when Princess Diana died, and the thousands of people that swarmed central London to pay their respects to her. That was, of course, a very different situation. She was a very young woman. She died in very shocking and unexpected circumstances. This is a very elderly monarch. We've known that she's been in poor health for months. This is not totally unexpected, but she was much loved by many, many, many people in this country. So let's see how this plays out here in central London in the hours and days to come. We know that British officials have been planning for this moment for many years. We understand that the plans for the Queen's funeral even have a name known as Operation London Bridge.
Holly Williams, thank you. And I think as Mark Phillips also said today, and while the news is not a surprise, it still comes as a shock once you hear it. And of course, many had just recently remembered the passing of her husband. The Queen was married to Prince Philip for 73 years. They were the longest married couple in British royal history. And in 1997, for their 50th wedding anniversary, we want to play for you some of what Elizabeth, Her Majesty, had to say about the importance of Philip to her, as well as to Britain.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim or we shall ever know.
I want to bring back in Tina Brown, because Tina was just last year, I think he died just before reaching the age of 100. And I remember thinking at the time, they have been together for so long and had been together for so much that it's hard anytime when someone loses a spouse that they've been with for almost their entire life.
Yes, and what was so, in a way, touching and amazing was that the last year of Philip's life, they spent together more time than they've ever spent in their entire life, because they were locked down together at Windsor Castle in their bubble. And it was almost like the beginning of their courtship, when they had this kind of wonderful, sort of intimate last days together there, which was a great blessing, an unexpected blessing really for the both of them, essentially, particularly for the Queen. Philip kept the Queen real. That's why she loved him so. He had a strong sense of humor. He was incredibly irreverent. He made her laugh, and he always told her the truth. And that is what she loved about him.
What was his relationship like with now King Charles III?
A very complicated and very difficult relationship, unfortunately. They were like ships that passed in the night. They could never properly connect. Charles was a disappointment to Philip. There's no question, and he made no secret of it. Charles was, sensitive, aesthetic, very, a person who needed a lot of mothering and didn't get it. And Prince Philip and he never had a good relationship, really. I mean, they had moments latterly where they got on better. But when Philip died, all Charles's memories of him in the documentary they made were about times when he'd sort of disappointed his father. It was very touching in a way. So it was a very difficult relationship. He was much closer, Philip, in fact, to Edward, to Anne, and even to Andrew.
Complicated, as they say, or complicated, as they say, with an accent, certainly. and on that point, how do you expect King Charles to rule?
Well, Charles has been groomed for this role for 50 years. I mean, he certainly understands what it means and what it takes. And he has a very statesman-like knowledge at this point of world affairs and world leaders. I mean, he's met everybody over his life, and he's been to multiple places, and he's supported the Queen, particularly latterly, in a very measured way, actually. But of course, he won't have the mystique that the Queen had, because we know too much of what Charles thinks about everything. We know nothing about what the Queen thinks. But I do actually think that Charles, if ever there could be a time for him to take over, this is a good time. His passions for the environment, very prescient, which he believed long before others. His sense of, his love of organic farming, his belief in, his concern about climate change, his passions, his beliefs really have kind of finally met the moment when other people agree with him, after being seen as a bit of a kook and a crank for so long, which is completely wrong, but it's how British people viewed him. So it's a good time, if there is a good time, for him to take over this role, and his job will actually be to prepare the path for William, because it's William's reign essentially that is going to be the next stage of the modern monarchy, not Charles's.
Really interesting. Tina Brown, thank you. Want to bring back in Mark Phillips on that point, because he is the oldest and longest serving heir apparent in British history. Mark, as Tina was pointing out, someone who's been essentially preparing for this his entire life.
longest internship in history, I think is the expression that's sometimes used here. But this is very much a transitional moment, not just for the obvious reason that the Queen is now dead and that Charles, who's a much different personality and is viewed much differently both in the country and outside, but for the whole post-war idea of Britain, the whole post-war idea of this monarchy reaching across the globe and what have you. There's already been a movement afoot in several places in the Caribbean, most prominently as a legacy to the slavery issue and the role of the British colonialism in that several countries, Barbados, for example, has already removed the Queen as head of state. There are nascent movements to dump her, well, now him, the British monarch, elsewhere in the Caribbean and around the country as well. It's very, very likely, I think, that this Queen, for all of her accomplishments and all of her length of stay in office, will be seen as the high watermark of the British monarchy in the post-war world.
Yeah, an important point to make just about how her passing is more than just symbolic, as Mark is pointing out, and could change a great many things around the world. I do want to note that Paul McCartney, who met Queen Elizabeth several times, spoke about her legacy to Gayle King. Let's listen.
What does it mean to you to be Sir Paul McCartney?
You know what it's like? It's an honor. And you think of things like what your mother and father, my mum and midwife, and my dad, just a cotton salesman, how proud they would have been, you know.
Even prouder to know the Queen would make their son a companion of honor.
So I was feeling pretty cheeky by now. I'm thinking, you know, I'm getting quite at home here. So I said to her, as she shook her hand, I said, we've got to stop meeting like this. And she went, what?
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 And let's bring in historian Amanda Foreman. And Amanda, on that point of her legacy and what she meant to so many people, this will affect so many, and we will be mourning her life and essentially watching what is going to be several days of ceremony, correct?
Yes, that is correct. There's going to be 10 days of official mourning. She will lie in state in Westminster Hall. People will be able to visit there for 23 hours a day. Her funeral is going to take place in Westminster Abbey. That's going to be the first time that a monarch's funeral will be in Westminster Abbey since 1760. So that is a momentous occasion in and of itself. And then she will go to Windsor Castle, where she will be buried in the chapel there alongside her husband. So these are some of the events that we can expect to happen.
And as a historian, look back for us. What will, in the scope of her legacy in the second Elizabethan era, how will that be remembered? How will it be written about in the books?
The first thing that the history books are going to comment on are that she was the longest reigning monarch in British history. And because she reigned so long, like her predecessor, Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria, the two other extremely long reigning queens, she defined her age. And that meant that although Britain's place in the world did decline after the Second World War, she nevertheless helped to keep this small island nation very much in the public eye and to give it a sense of glamour and importance that a country whose economy actually only puts it in the top 10 of world economies may not have otherwise merited. Her second important point, though, was that as a woman and as a queen, she helped to define how women were going to be in the modern age. She didn't have, as it were, a paying job, but she nevertheless had a job. And so people were able to look at her and think, this is how a woman who is important dresses, this is how she looks, she doesn't have to be a sex symbol or anything like that. And so that legacy is incredibly important. And then finally, her public service, her sense of duty, that is something that people can still latch onto in a world where it often seems that just being a celebrity is the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Amanda Foreman. And on the point of celebrity, I think, her grandchildren have in many ways become celebrities, certainly as Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, moved here to the United States. And I want to bring in Mark Phillips on that point, because it is our understanding that Prince William, His Royal Highness, and Prince Harry are there at Balmoral Castle, correct?
We know Prince William is there. We had heard that Prince Harry was due to arrive 5 or 10 minutes ago or so. I haven't seen actual visual confirmation that he is there. It's significant that he did not fly up with his brother, the Queen's children, Andrew and Edward and Sophie, her daughter-in-law, flew up together in one plane. There was some thought that Harry might be in that plane, but it turned out he was traveling separately. Meghan Markle is not going, as neither is Kate, William's wife. They stayed back in London with the kids. But yes, we think that Harry is either there or thereabouts now.
And Mark, just for clarification, because we were just showing pictures of Prince William and Kate and their 3 children walking. That was from earlier this week as they were at their new cottage. Explain how they've moved and how that family is transitioning as well.
They're moving out of central London onto a cottage on the estate, on the royal estate at Windsor, as a way of giving the kids a more normal kind of upbringing. They've eschewed a lot of the trappings of royalty, footmen and butlers and servants running hot and cold and that kind of thing, and are trying to establish as much of a quiet family life as they can, and they're doing that on this cottage on the Windsor estate. Previous to that, you may have known they were living in Kensington Palace, which is smack dab in the middle of London and offers them no privacy at all. This is the place they hope to get some.
And there we see, I believe they were taking the kids to their first day of school at their new school there, as they're in what I understand is maybe a 4-bedroom home, which is smaller for them, where they're saying the nanny is no longer a live-in. But now, of course, Prince William becomes the heir to the throne, and likely they had perhaps anticipated that, which is why they wanted even more privacy. I want to bring in Holly Williams one more time from outside Buckingham Palace. And Holly, I understand that more and more people are coming to be with one another there and mark the passing of Her Majesty.
That's right, Nora. In fact, we've just heard that Charles, who is now the king, will be known as King Charles III. There was some speculation that he might be known by some other name. I think, as you can see behind me, we've now got thousands of people coming down into central London to the gates of Buckingham Palace. It's not an unexpected death. She was elderly. She was in ill health. But I think it's still shocking for people because she was such a fixture in this country, had been on the throne for decades. I can speak a bit to that personally. I'm not British, I'm Australian. I'm from a former British colony, now a member of the Commonwealth. She was a fixture of our country as well, even though she was a 24-hour flight away, or several months sail away when our country was first colonized by the British. She's on our money, just as she's on the money here in the UK. And she was a kind of constant topic of conversation in Australia when I was growing up. I really remember that when we were children, if we didn't display very good habits at the dinner table, my parents would say, "We won't take you for tea with the Queen."
Well, there you have it, Holly Williams, a reminder about the Queen's constant presence in many people's lives. And as we've been covering, Queen Elizabeth II died earlier today at her Balmoral Castle in Scotland, and the impact of Queen Elizabeth had on not just the United Kingdom, but the world cannot be overstated. Her death will be followed by 10 days of mourning across the country and around the world. Our coverage of the death of Queen Elizabeth will continue on CBS News Streaming, Your Local News, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. Thank you for joining us for this CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell, along with my colleagues here and around the world. Thank you.